There we go. Okay. So my name's TJ Van Tol. I work for Telerik, whose building we are in today and whose tools we're going to be kind of going over today. I actually don't work out of this office. I'm all the way from Michigan on the other side of the country. And I flew up for this and to see the office and such. And in addition to working for Telerik, I'm also on the jQuery team. I spend a lot of my time working on jQuery UI. So if you have any questions about Telerik's products, I'll be around tonight, or about jQuery, whatever, feel free to grab me. And at least for today, I'm going to be talking about some of Telerik's products, mostly Icenium, which I have up there. And I want this to be pretty informal, open discussion, so feel free to interrupt me with any questions or whatever. We'll just kind of play it as it goes. One thing that I did want to do is we have some guys here from Meeting Pulse. There's two guys there if you want to raise your hands. And they have developed this app that basically provides real-time feedback for presenters. And if you'd like, we'd love if you'd want to help test this app out for us. You can either go to this URL up here, or you can actually scan this QR code, which will just bring you to that URL. And you'll get a little UI where you have 4 buttons there, where you can say, yes, I'm doing, you agree, you don't agree, you have some questions, or get going. That's the fast forward one at the end. So I'll give everybody a second if you want to join. We'd love to have your help testing this out. And I'll leave that up for a minute. I'm going to start the meeting. If you do get in, can you just mash some buttons for me for a minute so I can actually see that I'm getting things on here? I'm getting a couple buttons mashed. All right, anybody else still waiting on that? Okay. Good? Okay. So basically I have a few slides, a couple of minutes. I don't want to spend much time on the slides. I want to actually get into the tools. I just want to have a brief discussion. The first thing I want to talk about is kind of what these products, the problem that it's trying to solve. And if you look at the mobile landscape today, things are kind of crazy. This is data you've probably already seen before, but in terms of device sales, Android has quite a big lead on the pack, followed by iOS, and then you have like Windows Phone, BlackBerry, and behind it. And that's data that we've probably all seen before. The more interesting thing to me is the platform that developers are actually building for. So this actually is Vision Mobile, which is a company that gathers statistics like this, both the consumers data, like what people are buying, but also survey stuff from developers. So this is a question they asked, if you had to pick a primary platform that you develop for, would you say that is Android, iOS, or HTML5? And you can kind of see the results, Android, iOS, with HTML5 in behind it. So I'd like to flip this question on everybody here. If you have to pick a platform that you develop for, how many people would say that that platform is Android? Okay, a couple people. How many people would say that platform is iOS? A couple of people as well. And then how many people would say that's the web? Okay. So this is pretty interesting. About 25% Android, iOS, and about half the web. And each of these platforms have their own little nuances. So if you're talking about iOS, you're talking about coding in Objective-C, using Xcode, you're on Mac. If you're talking about Android, you're coding in Java. Eclipse is probably built into your workflow. If you're talking Windows Phone, you're talking C# and Visual Studio. Any Windows Phone people here by chance? Oh, we do have a couple people. Very cool. So Windows Phone as well. And then if you're talking about the web, you're talking about multi-platform, so just web technologies. And really this leaves us with 3 options when you actually go to build a brand new application. Are you going to build native apps, so individual apps for iOS, Android, Windows Phone, etc.? Are you going to build for the web, so your app is available at a URL? Or are you going to build a hybrid app? And what hybrid means is basically an app that takes these web technologies, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, wraps it up in an actual native container, so a true .ipa file for iOS, APK for Android, and makes it as an executable on the actual device. And this was an approach that was popularized by PhoneGap, and it's the same approach Icenium takes as well. And we'll get into the specifics of that in a minute. But each of these approaches has their own advantages and disadvantages. So when you're talking about native, you're going to get the highest quality end app. You're going to get the true native APIs. You get access to push notifications. You get into the app stores. You're going to get the best possible performance and graphics. But the flip side of that is you also have high development costs because you have to build an iOS app and you have to build an Android app and you have to build a Windows app and you have to build the next big platform that comes out of the woodwork. And when you talk about the web, you're really talking about the flip side of this. You're developing once. You have one code base in web technologies, but at the same time, you have some limited APIs. If you wanted to access things like push notifications, you're just not going to be able to do that sort of thing. And the hybrid approach attempts at least to merge these two approaches, and by letting you write in web technologies, but still get the access to native APIs, still appear in the App Store, and try to get the best of both worlds for these approaches. And that's where Icenium comes into play. Icenium is a product produced by Telerik that really, in essence, just tries to make hybrid web development as easy as possible. So it's basically a bunch of tooling around that. And Icenium actually uses PhoneGap to do this. And there's an asterisk there because PhoneGap, it actually uses Cordova. How many people here are familiar with PhoneGap or Cordova? Okay, so a good number of people. The difference between the two is kind of weird, and I don't even totally understand it. But PhoneGap was developed by this small company called Natobi that had this great idea, basically the whole hybrid idea, that it'd be great if we could write these web technologies but actually appear in the App Store, actually get packaged apps. So they built PhoneGap, and PhoneGap became very popular. And Adobe ended up buying PhoneGap, and including the name PhoneGap. And when that happened, PhoneGap split into Cordova and PhoneGap, where Cordova is the open source, always freely available APIs. And that's actually what Icenium uses. So we're talking about access to things like the camera, the accelerometer, things like that. There's about 12 or 14 of the APIs in Cordova nowadays. And PhoneGap, when Adobe actually purchased Cordova, they reserved the right to add extra features on top of PhoneGap, potentially paid features. And they've done some of this with PhoneGap Build, and we'll get into that in a minute. But for the purposes of this, Icenium is for hybrid web development, and it has the Cordova APIs available so that you can access some of these native features. Now, the other big part of Icenium is that it's a compiler as a service. So normally with the hybrid approach, because you're taking these web technologies and you're building true applications, you have to actually have the SDKs available to do it. So if you're talking about iOS, that means you need a Mac with Xcode to actually produce that applications. If you're talking about Android, you need to have the Android SDKs available somewhere to do it. And Icenium, what it does is it moves that process to the cloud. So instead of having these SDKs on your own machine and managing them or on some network computer in your area, we do it for you in the cloud and just give you back a QR code that you could scan and actually get your application. And we'll see how that works in a minute. But to put this graphically, we take the process of writing your code in your PC and then doing this middle step of working with SDKs and such to create these apps. And we put Icenium in the middle, and we take care of that pain point for you. And just one quick note, the reason on there, you'll see Windows there is grayed out. Right now, Icenium supports iOS and Android, and we're due to have Windows Phone support very shortly. I've been told March, but it should be pretty soon. I think we're working through kind of the last legal portions of it at this time. But Windows Phone shortly. Are any BlackBerry people here? Okay, good. So funny thing, like we debated, if you remember from that first chart, like Windows Phone and BlackBerry, right, kind of vying for third place. And we've actually, from our customers and just from the community in general, have had a pretty reasonable demand for Windows Phone support. We haven't had that same demand for BlackBerry, and we actually asked, because there's a large engineering effort that goes into supporting these platforms, we actually asked our customer base and such, like, do you care about BlackBerry support? And by and large, the answer was no, unfortunate, for better or worse. So Icenium does not support BlackBerry, but we support iOS, we support Android, and then we will have Windows Phone support very shortly. Now, what Icenium actually is, what do you actually see? It's really actually just a series of IDEs. There's a browser-based client, a Windows client, and then an extension directly into Visual Studio. And Windows developers? A couple of people. Anybody use Visual Studio? Okay, actually a couple people. So I won't be showing much of the extension for Visual Studio, but all the behavior I'm going to show today from the browser-based client is incorporated directly into Visual Studio. With the extension, the options that we'll show will just appear in the same menus, essentially. And I'll be focusing today mostly on Icenium, which is Telerik's hybrid development platform, but Icenium ties into a number of Telerik's other products. So we'll look at Kendo UI Mobile, which is a framework for building apps, a JavaScript framework. We'll look at Everlive, which is Telerik's backend as a service. You can think of it as a database in the cloud. And we'll also look at Equitech, which is Telerik's analytics products. But that's actually all I'm going to say. I don't like spending too much time on slides because I actually want to show the thing in action. So I am going to kill PowerPoint and my enormous sized network password and go straight into Icenium. So if you go to Icenium.com, this is what you see. If you click the big Start Now button, you'll actually jump into our in-browser editor. And there is a login required for this. So if you're not logged in, you'll actually have to go through the login to get to it. And if anybody wants to follow along, feel free to jump in. I'm just going to be walking through some of the features and some of the things in the UI. So what I'm going to do, this view, because I've used the product before, it's showing me the projects I've built before. I also have the ability to create new projects. We have a few templates pre-baked. We have a blank one, which is just a blank slate, essentially. We have one that ties into our backend services, and I'll show kind of how that works momentarily. And then we also have some pre-canned templates for jQuery Mobile, Kendo UI Mobile, and Kendo UI DataViz as well. This other tab here for samples, we have a number of demo apps that you can clone. And I should say you can just select these and clone them and just test them out in the IDE. I'll be showing a few of these. We also have some samples available for all of Cordova's core APIs. So if, for instance, you were really curious how the Compass API in Cordova worked, you could clone this app, play around with it, tinker with it, that sort of thing. And then we also have some advanced API demos that show kind of more niche things, like if you wanted to do push notifications in your app or integrate with Facebook or such things, you could clone those, test them out, see what they're doing, and kind of apply that to your own apps.
Real quick question.
Yeah.
Since it involves Visual Studio, if I was to go ahead and use this, are there any gotchas? Like, is it going to hijack my local host so I can no longer use my Apache server on local host?
I am not aware of any gotchas with dealing with host names like that. If you run into anything that
the reason why I bring that up is I went through this about a year ago, so it is subfun. In order to get it back, I had burrowed down like 4 different GUIs in the Windows interface and unchecked 2 or 3 boxes.
Are you saying specifically with Icenium?
No, I don't know anything about Icenium.
Okay.
Because it involved Visual Studio.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Do you purchase a separate license for Visual Studio?
It's a different part. It's part of a different pricing plan, and I'm going to go over the pricing at the end of this. And then the last option here is to clone. All of Icenium's projects have a tie-in to Git. Even if you're not necessarily using it, we give you a Git repo for free, and you can integrate that with externals. If you wanted to put your repo on GitHub, we make it easy for you to do that. And it's kind of our main means of collaboration within projects. And so to get started, I'm just going to bring up a Kendo UI mobile app and create it. Yeah.
So you get a. So if we subscribe to this, we get a GitHub account too. Is that
You don't get a GitHub account. We just make it easier if you want to integrate your projects into GitHub. We just give you a way of doing that to the UI.
So we still have to
Like,
subscribe to GitHub ourselves. And
yes, you'd have to subscribe. And if you we give you a way of like OAuth going into GitHub and seeing your projects list and doing that sort of thing. But it's very much a separate interaction. Now what this is doing when I started it, this was the Kendo UI mobile template. So it just gave me kind of a boilerplate for a Kendo UI mobile project. These are my sample files. And what you're seeing here is our IDE. So it's very much an IDE that you'd expect. You can see your files over here. I mean, this is a text editor. So I should probably crank this up a little bit. Can everybody see that? Good enough, at least? Yeah, okay. It's a text editor, so I mean, I can edit text. It's not really the IDE features that sets Icenium apart. It's kind of some of this stuff you can do up here. So rather than looking at what this code does, I'm actually just going to bring up our simulators. What this run menu does is I'm going to skip build and come back to it momentarily, but these are our different simulators. So we have simulators for common devices, iPhone, Android, and as I said, we'll have Windows Phone on there shortly.
It's funny if you mind just angling the computer so that your it can be off a little bit to your right so I can see more of the screen.
Yeah, is that like that?
Or just angle it so that you're not in front. Like just angle it, you know, so that.
I like this?
Yeah, like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do what I can.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so this is our simulator. What you're looking at here is essentially a mocked iPhone, and you can get an idea of what it looks like. Has anybody here used Ripple, like BlackBerry's thing before? It's kind of like that in that you can kind of mock some of these Cordova APIs. So if you were developing an app that you cared about the latitude or longitude or speed or compass direction or that sort of thing, that you could use this the simulator to actually alter those things to test out your app. The other one we have here is the network, which this is cool if you want to test the offline capabilities of your app. You can just say, I want to see how my app works when I have absolutely no network connection. And do things like rotate the device, that sort of thing. And you can get the same sort of things for Android as well. But, of course, this is just a simulator, right? It's our engineering team came up with some pretty cool ways of showing iframes to kind of give you the best possible way that you can simulate a device in the browser. But it's just a simulation. It's not actually testing the real thing. And what this build option does is it will actually do a true build for you. And since this takes a minute, I'm going to go ahead and get it started. So you see Android and iOS. I'm going to start with Android because the process is far easier and get this started. And what's happening here is because our project's source code is actually stored in the cloud, we're telling Icenium, I want to perform a build of this code. It's using the SDK that Icenium has in the cloud, performing that build. And what it's going to give back to me is just a QR code that I can scan on my device. And I need to get that up. So this is going to be like an inception moment here. This question comes up a lot. So what I'm actually using to display my device on my screen, it's this project called Droid at Screen, which is just a quick little Java utility that just lets me show my screen on the projector. And what I'm in is my QR scanner here. We'll see if I can manage to line things up correctly. So as I said, it did the build in the cloud. The QR code pointed me at a URL, and you can see that I actually have an APK file, and if I say OK, it's going to go ahead and download it. And if the Wi-Fi gods are with me today, this will bring up the actual app through the actual Android installation process. There we go. I can open it up. My splash screen here will show in a second.
Does Telerik have their own source code control? Does it just use GitHub?
It uses Git. Through the Visual Studio extensions, we have some other types of source control like TFS, and I don't remember the other ones, but it's mostly Git that's associated with each repository. So here's my app splash screen.
But do you guys run your own Git servers, or do you guys use GitHub?
We have our own servers for that, yeah. So this is my actual app that's showing on the device here. And what's cool about this is that this is an actual Android app. This isn't just running in a browser. This is an app that I have installed on my device that I'm actually running and that I can play with. Now, this is cool. But the really cool feature is you saw that was kind of a pain. It was kind of awkward for me to give that presentation because I have to wait like 2 minutes of sitting here awkwardly while the thing installs and such, and it's a complete pain. So we have this feature called Live Sync, which basically means I can go in here and this welcome text right here that I'm going to blow up a little bit, this welcome text here corresponds to this right here. And if I go up and change this text, save this file in the browser, and I come back here, and you won't be able to see this on the screen, but there's this little icon in the bottom bar here. If I click it, and I click it correctly, it will go ahead, fetch those changes, and now it'll say welcome TJ. So what it did is, under the hoods, it figured out a way to inject those web changes into the actual Android app and just gave you a quick way of refreshing it on the device to see those changes take effect, which I think is pretty slick. I come from a web development background, and the thing that I've always hated about server-side anything is dealing with the build step. So I used to do Java development, and there's some horror stories of just making a change and then just sitting there and waiting for things to happen. So to me, just the ability to, essentially, it's like a refresh button for a native app, which is pretty slick. Now this gets kind of cooler because
maybe it's a stupid question, but so you're doing development, you've had people download this app, you must build these sample apps in an environment for you and your coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
Because this then reflects on all people who've installed the app, right?
I don't think I understand the question.
If you make a change, welcome TJ, every single app is going to get that update.
Oh, this is just for your development environment. So this isn't changing like the app as in like everybody that's out using the app. This is just affecting, like that QR code was specific to that build that you requested for the state of the source code at that point in time. Does that make sense?
So you don't need to update that. Basically, you can just refresh it for your usage.
Correct. It's just you're just looking at your usage of the project. It's not reflecting like the actual, like we're not talking about an app that's actually like say deployed at this point. We're just talking your yeah. This is just your debugging process. Does that help? Does that answer the question?
It doesn't help. So you've just downloaded an APK file, right?
Yes.
The APK file doesn't really know who it came from. You basically got code inside the APK file that goes to the server and asks for updates. Right?
Oh yes. Okay. Okay. So when I went to this build step for Android, you see this configure live sync button. So basically, that's telling us that package is in the magic to do that into the APK when you configure live sync.
So you're dynamically downloading the JavaScript files and
yes.
checking them into
correct.
Your framework.
Yes.
Okay,
and there's some things, so there's some limitations to this, right? Like you can do it with the web technologies, like the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but some of the other things we're going to look at, some of the Cordova ties, they actually do require a full build. Like you can't change an Android properties file and then just click a button and have it refresh. It actually has to go through the full refresh process. But for the web files, you can. And where I was going here is this is our mobile designer. And this is,
I have a question though.
yeah.
Why did it turn dark?
Okay, so that actually, let me bring that back up. So this project is using a Kendo UI mobile theme, and one of the things that Kendo UI mobile does is it actually tries to match the native UI platform as much as possible. So this was our best attempt, or the engineering's best attempt at making an Android theme. And if you remember from when I showed it on the iOS simulator, it looked a little more iOS-y. So it detects the platform you're on and it attempts to match that, at least to a reasonable perspective.
So
and
when you change the welcome, you also change the theme?
I did not. What I did is I clicked the flat button that's right here. One of the things that we added is a flat theme that was, because we got some people liked the fact that it mirrored the device, but some people just didn't want that. And the flat theme was designed as a theme that could just work anywhere.
So basically, you change the theme.
I had changed the theme the first time, and then when I refreshed it, just reverted back to the original theme. Yep. So this is our mobile UI designer, which is basically just a drag and drop tool. We have our controls, and you can just visually change things. And this isn't really, this does actually change the code behind the scenes when you do this sort of thing, which is kind of slick. I usually tell people that this isn't really a production tool, like you wouldn't want to drag and drop some controls and send some app to production. But it's pretty cool for prototyping, especially when you talk about the live sync. So I just saved that back button there, and if I go back to my app and refresh, you can, oh yeah, and this, come on, refresh.
How many users are your servers serving now?
I don't have exact numbers. It's in the thousands, if not tens of thousands, but I don't have exact numbers for you. So I'm not. Let's see if. Try it again. And if I switch back over to the flat theme, you can see that the back button there appeared. I'm not sure what happened there the first time, but the mobile designer is nice for kind of this quick testing. If you have, say, a group of people just kind of brainstorming about a UI, you can just toss some controls out and then just do the quick refresh to see how it actually looks and feels, change the orientation, things like that. So it's a nice tool for that. This designer, I should mention, it's specifically for Kendo UI Mobile. So if you bring in a jQuery mobile project or some other framework that you like, you're not going to have this design tool available. But I find it handy for that. So the next thing I want to show, so that was Android. And Android, the situation is pretty straightforward. I just clicked this button and I had my build. Now, how many people are here familiar with iOS's provisioning processes at all? Yeah. So if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a complete pain in the ass. So I say that Icenium really tries to make the hybrid experience as easy as possible, and we truly do. But the one thing we can't do is we can't walk you through Apple's insane processes for you. And what that means is we can't keep you from joining iOS's developer program, which is $99 a year. You still have to do that. We can't keep you from going to Apple's developer site and setting up certificates and registering your devices and setting up provisioning profiles, because Apple doesn't provide any APIs or anything to do this. So we do what we can, and by that I mean we have some menus here where we let you do things like upload your provisioning profiles, and we give you documentation where we'll walk you through, give you screenshots of what you actually have to do. We do what we can, and we would love to actually do all that stuff for you, but unfortunately we just can't. Apple just kind of makes that sort of thing impossible. So we try with documentation, but we do have one little trick that I'm going to show. And I'm going to switch back over to iOS. Now, when I run the build for iOS, I'm going to have two options, Ion and Provision. And I'm going to click Ion, and you'll see that I got this QR code right away. And what we're doing is actually a little trick. And I'm going to bring this up on my device as well. See if technology is with me today. So this is an app called Reflector. Has anybody here heard of Reflector? Now it basically serves the same purpose as the Android app I was using, to just show my iPhone on the screen. And it's a great little tool when it works. Unfortunately right now, and I wonder if it's because I'm not on the Wi-Fi in my phone. But unfortunately right now I'm not seeing it, but that's okay. But what this does is it gives me a QR code that I can scan. And we actually have, Telerik, we have this app called Icenium Ion in the App Store that if you load it up on the app, we give you a way of injecting the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript into it without having to go through all of iOS's crazy processes. Now, this is limited in the fact that, again, it's only going to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We mock up some of the Cordova APIs so that they'll work in this container. But Ion is just an app that loads your app, more or less, for actual testing on the device. And the same basic thing is going to be possible, though, with Live Sync. So if I go back here, and here's my title again. And I change it. And on iOS, we actually do a 3-finger to refresh. And it'll actually download it and update the title. I'm not sure how well you can actually see it from here. I'm sorry that my the reflector is not working for me today, which is unfortunate. But we have that for iOS. And let me try one last time. Nope. It appears it's just not going to work for me today. That is unfortunate. But so that was Ion. Ion's just a way of doing quick testing on iOS. Just load some web technologies onto your phone. But again, that's just for the web technologies, and to actually do a true iOS build, if you actually want a .ipa file that can install on your phone, at that point you do have to go through the full processes. You have to become an iOS developer, go through all of Apple's licensing and stuff to make that stuff available. And I do want to show that, so I'm going to switch over to another app and not just a sample. And I built this little app called GIF Thyself, which is an app that uses the device's camera to take pictures and then build an animated GIF from it. And unfortunately, I can't show my phone on the screen. Let me go ahead and this isn't going to work. So what I sent, I'll do it anyways. So basically how this app works is you take pictures with the phone. So here, everybody raise your hands. Okay. Okay, now everybody raise your hands and point them this way. Okay, and then I promise this is the last time, but now raise your hands and point it this way. Okay, now I apologize that I can't actually show you this on the screen, but what this happens is I get those pictures using Cordova's camera APIs, and I found this algorithm on the internet of somebody who took a ActionScript algorithm for building animated GIFs from base 64 encoded strings and to turn it into an animated GIF. And I have no idea what this algorithm actually does other than it works, but I will say it's a great way to put your device to the limits, because when I first did this, I was building 1,000 pixel animated GIFs, and my phone did not like that. Basically, I put three images in, and it took it down, so I had to shrink it down a bit. And I'm actually going to upload it. I have this tied into Telerik's backend services to show the GIF, and I get the picture here, and I'm going to have to bring it up kind of through the back door since I can't show my phone.
So processing is done on the phone, and then you uploaded it?
It's using our backend services, which has SDKs available for JavaScript and
It's on the server
Yep, so it did the upload here. And there's everybody. So I wanted to briefly show some of the code that makes this possible. If I go in here, so the code here is all it takes to actually get the image off the camera. All I have to do is call navigator.camera.getPicture, and this is actually a Cordova API, so it's something you'd see documented on Cordova's website that tells you how to actually get the picture from the device. Now under the hoods, somebody in Cordova, PhoneGap, Adobe, whoever, actually wrote the backend code. So there's some Objective-C code that actually incorporates with iOS's APIs to show the camera. And this translates it to JavaScript, so you just get a JavaScript API that you can use to get it. And when I get back is just a base 64 encoded string of the image that I'm sending to that magical JavaScript API to build the GIF for me. And that's really all there is to using these Cordova APIs. There's not a whole lot to it. The other code I wanted to show was the code to actually upload the image. And that's using our backend services. And so what I do is, as I said, Everlive, Telerik's backend services, this is just my API key that I pass to it. This is actually using our JavaScript API. And if I go here, I just have a quick way of uploading this data to the server. And that's what this data tab is over here, is it just gives me a way of seeing the back end of my projects. With Everlive is really, it's a great use case for little apps like this, because at least stuff I've done before, you build an app like this and you're like, where the hell am I going to put my data? Like if you have just a form field or a survey or whatever it might be, you're going to spin something up on Heroku, or how in the heck you're going to handle that. Our backend services is a great place to put that. And so what I did before is I just went over here to show the items, and this is just listing out the files that I have associated with this project. But our backend services give you the ability to say, like, add user management and authorization, and you can do push notifications, and you can send emails and do all sorts of things like that, utility functionality that apps need to do. Let's see. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, though, is that in my mind, the real power of Cordova is not necessarily the core APIs. So you hear those things all the time. When you hear about PhoneGap, you think things like, oh, you can access the camera and the accelerometer and things. But to me, the more powerful thing is it's just a bridge to give you access to any native APIs. It doesn't have to be the camera. And an example of this is when iOS 7 came out, they did some changes to the status bar. Are people familiar with the iOS 7 status bar change? Okay, a couple people. But essentially, they changed it so it was transparent, and it screwed with a lot of hybrid web apps, because all of a sudden, the apps were expecting the status bar to be here and then their app to take place underneath. But Apple changed it so that the status bar just kind of melded into the app by default, which screwed with a lot of people. And the one way around this is somebody quickly thereafter built a Cordova plugin so that you could actually have a bridge to the iOS native APIs. And I imported this plugin. Oh, I don't have it here. So I'm going to actually show you the full process it takes to actually add this plugin. So I downloaded it earlier from my machine, or from GitHub, I should say. And I'm going to bring it in here. And so I have the status bar plugin in here. I am going to rename it, make it a little easier to deal with. One thing I have to change in this file, normally we don't make you deal with any configuration. I know because I just tried this out that all of the plugins have in their metadata basically what versions of Cordova they support. And I know this one works with 3.2, which is the version I'm using. It's just still in there in GitHub as 3.1. So there's that. The other things I have to do is if I go into my source code, I have to add the script tag. The way that the PhoneGap or the Cordova build works is it uses these folder names and makes those available as script files directly and gives me a JavaScript API to use those. And in this case, the API they chose was this status bar. And what I can say is overlays web view. So that's what I was talking about where you had the status bar and then the web app. So by setting overlays web view to false, it'll return basically the iOS 6 behavior where the app just sits under the status bar. But since this app exists, the person who did this just added a bunch of kind of cool features because you can do it in iOS and said, hey, let's just make it so you can just change the background color of the status bar because that's something native apps can do, but you can't do that from the web. There's no API that says, I'd like this status bar to be green. So this, though, however, is because I added a custom plugin, this is a situation, one of those things that's not going to work unless I do a true build. If I tried to run this in Ion, it's just not going to recognize this because it doesn't know what that plugin is. It needs to actually build in that tie to the native APIs. So in this case, I actually have to go through a full provisioned iOS build, deal with the different provisioning profiles, which iOS has development, distribution, and ad hoc provisioning profiles, all of which are crazy, but ad hoc is the way of just getting a testing app on your device. And then I'm actually going to run the build. And I'll try to get my way of showing this on the screen up while this is running. Does anybody have any questions? Because this is going to take a minute.
Why does it take a couple minutes to build something?
It's just what it takes to build an iOS project in Xcode.
Is that because you guys are located in Bulgaria?
Well, the servers are distributed that you're running off of. It's not necessarily going to Bulgaria to build this. At least I hope not. I don't. But I mean, from the iOS work I've done, I'd say that the build times for this is pretty similar to just working with Xcode. Or I don't know.
Is the provisioning the same as through direct native?
Say that again.
Is the provisioning the same process? Just sort of.
Yeah.
There's no benefit.
Because at the end, it's still it's just a native app, so it's the exact same process. Which I guess one advantage of that is you do benefit from the existing documentation and such. There's no like special rules for hybrid apps. It works exactly the same as it does for native.
When you do the build, most of the files you're using probably ought to be sitting in RAM someplace on the build server, right? In the cloud.
Yeah.
So the number of accesses, I'm trying to think of, what's keeping it slow? Because the CPU should do things pretty quickly. So I'm old enough. See gray hair. I used to go to hard drive and you hear the head going back and forth. But if you have a build server and it's got umpteen gigabytes of RAM, all the files that you normally use should be there, and then you got a few little sprinkling of files you did to load in from a hard drive. That ought to be it. So I can never figure out why it takes 2 minutes. Everybody takes 2 minutes to make a build.
Yeah, that's actually it's pretty good feedback. I'm definitely going to follow up with that with the team behind this and see.
You're not slow. Everybody's the same.
Well, yeah, I know, but I'm curious if there's anything. I don't think we're doing anything extra other than we do have one tip in there the text that you probably couldn't read on the side was saying you can disable Cordova plugins for speed efficiencies. So we package a number of them in by default, but each one of those that you include requires a little more work for the build, and an extra thing to inject into the final file. So you can kind of toggle those off, the ones that you're not using, to speed up the time a little bit. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're at Apple's mercy and Android's mercy for the times for that. And if I scan this, so this will actually have me install the app. And can't show it on the screen, but you should be able to see that when I bring this up, that what I changed, the status bar to yellow. And for those of you who can't see, hopefully you at least see a pixel or two of yellow on the top of the screen. Hopefully. But that's really the power that hybrid gives you, is that any of these APIs that exist, you have the chance to access. And that's most of what Icenium is, at least that's what I consider the big features. So the other things are, like I said, we try to make hybrid app development as easy as possible. So you'll see things like the version of the app that you have, the orientations that you support, the icons. How many people here have dealt with icons for mobile apps before? It's kind of a pain, isn't it? Because each platform has their own naming criteria, and then they have their own sizes. Like on iOS, it's pretty crazy the number of icons you need just to package up an app. So we'll help you out, tell you the dimensions you need. We'll actually also resize them. If your image is off, we'll take our best guess. For the icons, it's usually pretty easy since these are mostly squares. The same thing for splash screens. Of course, your splash screen needs 7 different versions on iOS because you could be running on a normal device or a Retina screen, or you could be on an iPhone 5, which is slightly taller, or you could be on one of the different iPads. So again, we do what we can here. We just give you the resolutions, try to give you a quick uploader so you don't have to worry, because each of these files on these platforms have things like their own naming schemes, things like that. Same for Android, because again, Android has its own limitations, and Windows Phone, of course, as well, which we'll have shortly, does the same thing. I guess the last thing, the last menu is we'll also, yeah.
On Windows, it's a little bit more interesting because some of the things you can vectorize the image.
Say that again?
You can vectorize the image if you love.
Oh, you can vectorize the image? Android, actually, their splash screen, has anybody here heard of a 9-patch file? Yeah, a couple people. I had no idea what this was up until something like a month ago, and I saw this lovely thing on here on the splash screen where you needed a 9-patch image. I'm like, what in the world is a 9-patch image? But it's basically kind of what you're saying, but it's kind of a very specialized way of, it's like they divide the image into 9 parts, and then the core will stay, but then they'll stretch out I should say the core, like the tic-tac-toe part, the plus part will, but then they stretch out the rest to kind of move the image. So Android does that, and I think Android has to deal with it a little more just because the screen size variation on Android is just absolute insanity, whereas in iOS world, they have a very limited set of things they support. And of course, they provide you a way of giving an image to each of those directly.
Do you have control of the text?
What text are you referring to?
Because the iOS text structure font generation is very different than in Windows. I think one is big and one is vectorized.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. The other thing is we do give you access to the actual core configuration files. So this is the stuff that you need to actually package up, say, like a Cordova app. And we manage these files for you, so you shouldn't have to touch them. But we do make them available for when you do need that sort of access. So real quickly, the last things, we'll help you publish to the App Store, actually get your app when you're ready to go out to Google Play and the App Store. I mentioned earlier that we have Git repositories built in, so at any point I can go ahead and commit my changes. We'll let you see the changes that you have. You can do commits directly in the browser. You can push them to a remote repo. You can connect, I mentioned earlier, you can connect with GitHub. So I can do that by going to configure a remote repository here. This is telling me this app is actually already available on GitHub, so it's telling me that. I can disconnect it, I can connect to GitHub, tie it to another project, any of those sort of things. And very shortly we're adding some more, I guess, complex Git interactions, things like branching that aren't quite possible yet. We're going to have that sort of thing shortly. So that's most of Icenium. I think we're running close to the end of the time. So the last thing I need to get into is the actual pricing. And so Icenium is a paid product. It should be very clear about that. But it does have a free trial. For 30 days, you get access to absolutely everything about Icenium. The first level, the developer level, is $16 a month. And you get everything we saw today. So you get access to our back-end services, so the database in the cloud. There are some data limits on there. If you try to shove 100 gigs into it, they're not going to let you do that without doing some sort of upgrade. You get access to our analytics, which we didn't really get a chance to look at. You also get a license for Kendo UI Mobile. So just specifically Kendo UI Mobile, not the rest of Kendo UI, but you can use that as well. And the kind of the next step up tier to the next pricing model is Kendo UI Data Viz. And I just want to bring up Kendo UI Data Viz. Actually, I should just bring up the demos themselves. Kendo UI is basically differentiated into 3 parts: web, mobile, and data viz. We looked at mobile. It's just the framework used to build the sample apps we were looking at. Kendo UI Web, there's a lot in Kendo UI Web. Think things like date picker, tooltip, things like that, but also a full MVC framework and a lot of other stuff. But when we're talking about the additional pricing bump for Icenium, is we're talking about the data visualization libraries. And so we're talking things about building area charts and line charts and bar charts. And so you get all the quick charts, but then you also get things that you probably need a statistics major to actually understand. Things like some of these scatter charts and things like that. So that's the next step up. And then the last platform is actually, the ultimate is specifically for the Icenium extensions to get the incorporation directly into Visual Studio. And I think, I don't know if Delana is still around, but I think we are, if you registered for this event, that we're going to be giving out some free licenses for these products as well for a limited period of time. So if not, make sure that you gave them your names and email addresses so we can contact you with that sort of information. So does anybody have any questions about anything at this point? Because we're basically at 8 o'clock now. Thing about Icenium or even jQuery? Yeah.
Local storage, working offline. Is there anything in your framework that sets up some sort of policies? You've got a backend for data, right?
Yeah.
Do you
Yep.
have some way of automatically caching things in local storage so you can work offline?
At this time, we do not. Is that something you are interested in?
I've already done it. It's sort of painful. So it's,
Yes. That's good to know. We don't have anything baked in to manage that for you. Essentially, at this point, it's like what you say. You have to store it in local storage and then figure out your own policy of when you get online how to synchronize that up. And
check the versions. And do the
yeah,
updates.
so it sounds like we don't have anything that's going to improve that drastically. So,
Yeah. Okay.
but that's good to know. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and end this. If you have any other questions, I'm TJ Van Tol. I'm TJ Van Tol on Twitter and GitHub, and feel free to reach out, ask any questions about any of these products or whatever. So, and thank you.
Thanks, TJ.
Yeah.